All right, folks, we are doing something a little bit different today. We are in my living room right now because, like everyone else, I am in quarantine. I want to do something a little bit different today. I want to tell you guys a story. And this story goes back to 2004, to my high school days. I was in 11th grade, and in 2004, there was a shooting at my high school. I've been thinking a lot about this event because there's actually a couple of parallels with what is happening right now in the world. So let me share that with you. On that fateful day in 2004, one of our teachers, she was an ESL teacher at my school, named Ashugal Kandir. She was gunned down by her husband. He ambushed her in the parking lot of our school. She had left him while he had been on vacation. So inside the school, all we knew was that sirens started to blare and we didn't know what was going on. So I was in a creative writing class, and I, like my fellow classmates, felt pretty scared. At first, we all thought it was a fire alarm. So we ran out into the hallways thinking, we gotta get out of the school, when in fact, we needed to stay in the classrooms. The vice principal ran through the hallways telling us to stay in the classrooms and whatnot. And so we did. Inside the classroom, we barricaded ourselves to one side of the room with all the desks and chairs and stuff like that. And we basically sat in fearful silence in the dark for 4 or 5 hours with sirens blaring the entire time. This was the age before smartphones. It was actually really difficult to get information and to figure out what was happening inside the school. There were no announcements or anything like that letting us know what was going on. We had to rely on the couple of kids in the classroom who had cell phones at that time. They would call their parents would watch the news, and then they would report back what they were seeing on the news with respect to what was happening in the school. So that was how we had to get our information. We, in the order of, minutes, hours, received 20 different pieces of information that were all conflicting. We would hear that the shooter was in the school, that the shooting happened in the lobby, that the shooting happened out in the parking lot, that the shooting happened on the second floor, that there was a gunman still in the school. There was just a ton of misinformation, and we were all really, really terrified. There were a lot of noises happening in other classrooms, so we didn't know if there was, if the shooter was in one of the classrooms upstairs or whatnot. My class was very, very scared. Incredibly scared. And so was I. I didn't know if I was gonna come home that day. I believe, if I remember correctly, I used one of my friend's cell phones to call my parents and leave them a message just in case something actually happened to me on that day. I remember when the siren stopped blaring and tactical had swept through the school, and there was a knock on the door of our classroom, and our teacher had to go and answer that door. And I just remember having this horrifying vision of her being shot through the door as she did that. Thankfully, that is not what happened. It was just tactical letting us know that it was okay to leave. And we did. We left the school. I went outside and I looked around. I remember it was kind of snowing, and there was just news vans everywhere. I mean, it's one thing when you see it on the news, but it's another thing to be on the news. That was really, really surreal and very strange. So I went home that day and turned on the news to see what had happened at our school. And at this point, we actually did know who the teacher was. It's strange, going home and watching your own school on the news. And I remember this one news outlet in a rush to, have the latest breaking information, took a piece of information that I guess they heard from a student and it was incorrect, and they reported it. And what they reported was that the wrong person had been killed. And this person, it was another teacher, she was alive and well, but her family back overseas heard that she was dead and rightfully panicked. What this entire incident taught me is how much misinformation is spread in times of crisis. When there are gaps of information, news outlets will do whatever they can to be the latest breaking, news report. And as a result, they will often sacrifice integrity in their reporting. So that's something that I learned. Another thing that I learned was how much your environment has to do with how you perceive a situation. So for example, in my classroom, we were all terrified. I mean, absolutely horrified. However, in the subsequent days and weeks, as I caught up with other friends and discussed like what had happened, I learned that not every classroom was horrified. Some classrooms played board games for the 4 or 5 hours during lockdown and didn't feel any fear whatsoever. Meanwhile, my classroom was cowering, in the far corner, terrified for 4 to 5 hours. So what that really showed me is how much of a difference it makes to have a strong leader or a certain type of leader in the sort of microcosm of an environment. So for example, my teacher in that class was very scared herself. Rightfully so. It was a very scary situation. But as students, we all took her lead as a result. We were all terrified. If you're a student, you're not going to be like chipper and like really optimistic if your adult in that situation is freaking out. In other classrooms, there were teachers who were a lot more relaxed about the situation, did a really good job keeping everybody calm, and it really showed because those students came out of the situation, a lot more relaxed, less traumatized from the experience. Whether or not like it was the right thing for the teachers to like bust out board games and like make light of the situation, that's anyone's guess at this point. But it was just interesting to see that there were just completely different experiences of the exact same situation. So that's something I'm seeing right now with this whole like COVID-19 shutdown. It's really, on paper, we're all going through the same thing, the same shutdown, the same pandemic, but in practice, we're all experiencing it so differently. Me, for example, I've been doing my best to like stay away from watching the news. I'll definitely read the news. I like to stay informed. I like to know what our current numbers are and that sort of thing, but I stay away from actually watching news outlets because I find that as soon as I watch for like 15, 20 minutes, I start getting anxiety. And that, quite frankly, does not help me in my day-to-day life and staying focused and staying sane. Speaking of sanity, this one's so good. Some friends are really experiencing a ton of anxiety, understandably. Other friends are just like, go with the flow. I've tried to be on the go with the flow side of things, and I think it's helping that I'm not like watching the news and like really inundating myself with like images of all the terrible stuff that's happening around the world, which is happening regardless if I'm watching it or not. This has been an interesting time to really, really reflect on society in general, how we operate as a society, how the media operates. And it's really forced me to like think a lot about the best way to approach a situation like this. We're only able to control ourselves. We can't control the actions of others. I can't control whether other people are going and having parties, and some people are, but I can control my own actions and you can control your own actions. So that's really what it comes down to. And we sort of have to resign ourselves to whatever happens at this point that's out of our control, unfortunately. This is a really, really strange time. I mean, it really is. Today actually marks 27 years since my family moved to Canada from Bosnia. We moved in 1993 due to the war that started in the Balkans. And though I never saw anything terrible happen over there, a lot of my family did and a lot of my family suffered. So in that sense, I've always been kind of in tune with what can happen. And something I've really noticed is here in the West, we have this perception of like, it could never happen here. This pandemic has been a great equalizer in the sense that none of us are immune. So it doesn't matter what country you're in, you're still susceptible to this pandemic. So perhaps it's a little overly optimistic of me to think that coming out of this perhaps will be more empathetic and more compassionate when we see people suffering on the news. It's hard to say. I mean, I like to remain on the optimistic side of things. What can I say? But I guess only time will tell. There really are, in my opinion, only 3 things that need to happen in a society for there to be, civil disobedience and unrest. And to me, those 3 things are fear, poverty, and desperation. I've been talking a lot about this with friends. So right now, we're all pretty scared, let's face it. There's fear of the unknown. There's fear that I'll get sick, that my family will get sick, that we'll lose people that we know to this disease, that we'll be overrun by this pandemic. There's fear of not having enough. There's fear of money running out. There's fear of whether our businesses will survive however long this shutdown takes. And then poverty. So many people are unable to work right now, have been laid off, maybe don't have adequate savings to get them through however long this will take. So that's a very, real thing. A lot of people have enormous mortgages that they're not going to be able to pay right now. So that's all extremely scary. So that poverty leads right back into the fear. And then desperation, you mix fear and poverty long enough and you end up with desperation. In the West, I feel that we've always kind of had the sentiment of it can never happen here. That's bad things happen in other places and we're different and maybe we're better, but really it can happen anywhere because we're all human. And as humans, we are all susceptible to these feelings. The best thing that we can do at the end of the day is lean on our friends, support our communities, really show how much we care, love one another. I think situations like this really show what people are made of and who your friends really are and who your support networks really are. So it's important, I think, to really foster community at times like this in order to prevent all that, negative stuff from happening down the line. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. I, kept it totally off script today, so hopefully I didn't blab too much, but wanted to share that story. I felt like there was some relevance there with respect to what we all experienced back in 2004 and kind of what's going on now. Oddly enough, right? Like you wouldn't really think that there were too many parallels, but there you go. Apologies that none of my video today has anything to do about photography, but you know what? Desperate times call for desperate measures, and I feel like I can go a little off topic. Thank you guys for joining so much. Expect to see more videos from probably my living room. Why go to the studio if I can just hang out here with my cats and some wine, right? Thanks for watching. Mwah.